On today's show, attorney, legal ethics advisor, and technology consultant Jennifer Ellis. We'll be talking about AI hallucinations in law practice, why they happen, where lawyers are getting into trouble, and what attorneys and firms need to do to use AI safely and competently. Jennifer breaks down how to reduce hallucinations, verify AI output, train your team, and put the right safeguards in place so you can take advantage of AI without creating unnecessary risk for your clients or your firm.
The hallucination, it's not going to make up a case like ChatGPT or Claude might do, but it might tell you a holding that is dicta, or it might give you a case that has nothing whatsoever to do with the topic you're researching. So the reality is no matter which generative AI you're using, you're going to experience hallucinations.
Welcome to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring what makes law firms thrive. I'm your host, Jason Marsh. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and accomplished law firm owners in our space. Together, we'll dive deep into law firm operations, marketing, technology, finance, and everything else you need to build an incredible firm that allows you to live your best life. Hello, welcome back to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm Jason Marsh. I'm the host here. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Ellis. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
So I was reading your article, back in the ABA's Law Practice Today on AI hallucinations, and I thought I really wanted to talk to you about this, right? Because we all know AI is moving super fast. It's unlike basically any technology we've ever seen, and all of us and lawyers, we're all trying to figure out how to use it safely, right? And then for some lawyers, in some cases, it's led to some issues, right? Like citing cases in actual legal work, cases that don't even exist, right? So anyway, I want to break down, why AI hallucinations are happening, how lawyers and their teams can actually use these tools effectively and safely within their practice. And so before we get, too deep in all this, I just want to give you a proper introduction here. Jennifer, she's a Pennsylvania attorney and the principal of Jennifer Ellis JD, where she advises lawyers and law firms on legal ethics, technology, and the use of AI within the law practice. So her work sits right at the intersection of professional responsibility and emerging technology, where she can help lawyers make sound decisions around technology and AI without taking on any unnecessary risk. And so she speaks and writes on these topics, including her blog. So thanks so much for coming on, Jennifer. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about all this.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so all right, so cool. So you've been focused on the risks around AI, specifically hallucinations, what we're going to be talking about here today, and how they're showing up in legal work. And we've seen now multiple examples of attorneys getting in the real trouble around some of this stuff for relying on information that simply isn't even real. So I'd like to start with that and why it is even happening in the first place. When lawyers run into these issues, is this just a misunderstanding of the technology and how it works, or are they maybe using the AI the wrong way? Like, what's going on here that produces these kind of false type of responses?
Well, the first thing is that AI, generative AI, by its nature, produces hallucinations. It's not a bug, it's a feature, if you will. And the reason is because if you think about generative AI as math, you don't need to run for the hills if you're a lawyer. I know most of us are not thrilled about math, and I'm one of them, but it is math. And what it is it is going based on probabilities. So to humanize it a little, which is always a little risky, it's guessing. It's looking at its training and trained on massive amount of language and other things. And it says, well, based upon my training, this answer here, or this word here, or this bit here is the most probable result to answer the question I've been asked. So if you think about probabilities, by their very nature, sometimes they're going to be wrong.
Yeah.
It's just the reality. When we hypothesize, and that's probably a more appropriate word for what AI is doing, based upon math, a lot of the answers are going to be right, but some of them are going to be wrong. And some models are better than other models depending upon what you're asking it to do.
And why are these models not able to figure out that they're wrong, or why are these models, frankly, programmed to say, oh, if you don't know the answer, just guess? I mean, how does that help anybody? It seems like just say you don't know. Or is it just because these tools are so aggressive with getting adoption, that's just not a possibility? Just give them something, let them go, get into some trouble, and as we probably all have by now, and learn your lesson. But what's going on with that? Why can't they fix this?
Well, I think some of it is to make the AI sticky. If you think about them, most of them are chatbots, and people use them in all sorts of ways. Now, most lawyers were talking about legal research and work, but I use them for recipes. I say, okay, this is what I have in my pantry. What could I make? And 99% of the time, the recipe is excellent, but every so often you get a lemon, because it's easier for it to do a recipe than it is for it to come up with legal research.
And why is that? Is that because of the access it has to recipes that exist all over the place online versus, legal, because I always think, why can't they just take every book ever written, everything ever, and obviously there's ownership rights involved in training the AI, but just put everything in there, and then the AI has access to all that. So why isn't that possible? Why does it do recipes better and it can't keep up with the legal knowledge and research?
The data is most likely in there, though, because AI is trained and the training date always has a cutoff, some of the data is not going to be in there. Oh. So if we look at, a few months ago I wrote a blog post, I think it was December, about how ChatGPT didn't know that Donald Trump was president. It thought it was still Joe Biden, because its training day was well before the election, so it didn't know that President Trump had been reelected. And it thought Biden was still president. So part of it's the cutoff date and how frequently cases are coming out.
And is that to do at all with what version, or if you have a paid version of, let's just say, the more commonly used like ChatGPT or Gemini, Claude, etc. In terms of the cutoff date of when their training is the free version from, I don't know, a couple years ago, whereas maybe the paid version is more recently, or you can get into that kind of trouble no matter what you're using?
You can get in that kind of trouble no matter what you're using. If you're using Lexis plus AI or Westlaw in its version of AI, they still hallucinate. The hallucination, it's not going to make up a case like ChatGPT or Claude might do, but it might tell you a holding that is dicta, or it might give you a case that has nothing whatsoever to do with the topic you're researching. So the reality is, no matter which generative AI you're using, you're going to experience hallucinations. It is just the way it works because of the probability nature of how it comes up with answers.
Got it. All right, I have so many questions for you on this, but in terms of just in that note, are there particular use cases where hallucinations are more likely versus less likely that we should be aware of? I mean, you mentioned, a recipe to cook with versus, legal research.
I think it's the complexity to a certain extent, and also AI doesn't understand context. So if you think about it, unless you take advantage of certain tools, every conversation is completely new between you and the AI. So unless you take advantage of memory or standing orders or something along those lines, every conversation is new. Though some of them have memory and will learn about you as time is going on, unless you specifically say to it, I don't want you to do X, or anytime I have you doing legal research for me, if you're not sure about the citation you're giving me, reveal that to me. So there are ways to minimize the risk, but it's never possible to completely take the risk away. It will always exist as long as we have AI tools, generative AI tools, that work in the fashion of large language models as they currently do.
Okay, because I definitely want to get into how to use the AI and prompting and various techniques to really get better outputs. But before we get into all that, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the specific instances where lawyers have gotten into trouble for relying on some AI output that wasn't accurate. What are some of the, obviously when you're doing real legal work versus, we're writing content for our website, but you're doing something you need to deliver to your client. There's a lot more at stake there. What kind of things have you seen happen there?
Well, I use AI a lot, so I would say a day doesn't go by where I don't see some fabrication, hallucination, bias. For example, if I'm being aggressive, it almost always calls me male. I have a friend who is deaf, and I guess his way of writing, it had trouble with, ChatGPT had trouble with, so it kept erasing his voice, which is ironic, I think. Whereas Claude doesn't seem to do that quite as much with him. As far as whenever I ask it an ethics question, if it tries to give me a citation, it normally makes it up because there are relatively few ethics opinions that come from court versus ethics opinions from maybe a bar association or something like that. When you're reading guidance versus an actual, here in Pennsylvania, it would be a Supreme Court opinion based upon someone's conduct that potentially got them in trouble. So I remember the first time I ever tried ChatGPT in 2022, it made up an ethics opinion. And the reason I tried it is a colleague had asked me about it, and he was curious what my perspective was. And of course, it was not as good in 2022 as it is now at appearing confident. And that very confidence is one of the things that I think fools people, because we have a tendency to believe things when they are confident. And AI is wonderful at sounding confident because that's how it's trained. So what happens is you get an opinion and it doesn't tell you that it's inferred it or made it up. It doesn't really necessarily know when it's giving you the answer that it's done that. It's not human. It doesn't intentionally mess with you. It's just made a mistake, but not in a human way. The real mistake is what humans do when they fail to verify any data they get from generative AI, which is a critical part of using it.
So what should like a proper verification process look like when you're working with AI on something that does have stakes? It's important. What should they be doing?
Well, that depends on the stakes. I begin with the lowest level of stakes. I have kind of a ladder that I use. So the lowest level is internal drafting of documents, but you still want to check because those internal documents could be the basis for external documents or briefs. So you still need to check. But then on the opposite end of the ladder may be court briefs, where you're actually filing documents, and that's where most lawyers are getting in trouble because they're not checking to verify that the citation is real and or stands for what they're claiming it stands for. Both of those two things can happen.
And so if they're trying to say, all right, I need a process to say I'm using AI, but I want to verify some of this stuff, I think, what is it, first to determine of this, what specifically do we need to verify, and then maybe secondly, all right, where are we going to go to actually do the verification within our own legal tools to do that?
Yeah, any fact, whether it's a citation or a quotation, or even if you are you're in an enterprise AI and entering confidential client data, you're going to want to confirm any facts it tells you about your client from that data. Because again, any AI, even if you're using your own AI that you've filled with your own data, can potentially hallucinate. A lot of those will have a link back to the client data. Say you're asking a confidential AI to look at a deposition. Whenever there's a summary, the AI could leave out an important fact. That's the nature of summaries, right? So, and sometimes it's just wrong. I recently asked Claude to summarize a case for me, and it completely misstated the holding. And that would have been very embarrassing if I hadn't reviewed it and I had written a blog post based on that, because I would have given a completely incorrect assessment of the case. Yeah. What Claude said was that the case was thrown out on the appeal because of the use of a fabricated AI opinion, which would have been a huge deal. But that's not what happened. It was that the person who seemed to be pro se didn't have a proper appeal and didn't have any appropriate claims for the appeal. And so based upon the rules of civil procedure, the case was tossed. and the claims were not allowed because they were not legitimate claims. What we see is there's a number of databases out there that track how many lawyers are in trouble, and it's a lot. But what I recommend, the way to check your AI is to check it in a non-AI tool. So let's say you're using Lexis plus AI or Westlaw, I think it's called CoCounsel. What you do is you go out of the AI to the traditional Westlaw or Lexis, and you check the citation to, one, make sure it's real, and two, you read the case. I'm amazed at the number of lawyers who apparently cite cases without actually reading them, which to me is law 101. One of the first things we learn in law school is, besides look to your left, look to your right, one of you is going to be gone. At least that's what they said back in the 90s. They also warn you that your reputation is the most important thing you have. And then first day legal methods, you learn how to read a case, right? And later how to research and write and do all those things. It's the most basic thing under the rules of competence. What it tells me, though, is that historically a lot of lawyers are not reading the cases, and we just were being generous in assuming they had made a mistake when they cite the case incorrectly, maybe because they got it from a blog post or from head notes or who knows where, or they're just engaging in wishful thinking, or we could be less charitable about why they're citing a case incorrectly, right? So what happens with AI is if you try to verify it in another AI, you might end up still having a hallucination.
You can maybe get a completely different garbage hallucination. Now you got two problems in your work.
Exactly. So what I say is if you can't afford Westlaw, if you can't afford Lexis, and they're expensive, I get it, use Google Scholar to check. And if you cannot find the case, some cases may not be in there, maybe they're unpublished, maybe they're in a very special citator that Google doesn't have access to, then you're going to need to look in that citator or find the case. If you cannot find the case in a legitimate source, don't cite it, because chances are good it's not
It's
real.
interesting as you describe it, because you could see on the one hand how it's very easy. I think we've all fallen into this, like, where you can get very complacent about trusting AI to do a lot of work for you and assuming that it's all going to be fine. Now, of course, again, the stakes are higher when you're doing client work here, and you need to be citing cases correctly and as well as what they mean. But does it get to a point where it's like, okay, I'm going to use AI to create this thing. Now I'm going to have to do a bunch of manual work to read it and review it and to check every single citation? Because sometimes I'm using AI and I'm like, the amount of times this thing is screwing up and I got to redo it's just, I'm like, I could have done all of this in honestly less time with a lot less aggravation than dealing with this AI tool. And it's hard to figure out where's the line. But in terms of all of this, you mentioned that there is an ethical duty and competence that an attorney is going to have in their work. And so where's maybe one of the biggest areas that you see these lawyers falling short today when it comes to using AI?
It's the fabrication of citations or the holding. So, for example, here in Pennsylvania, in the Eastern District, we had 2 lawyers get in trouble. And this scenario happens a lot. You are associated counsel because someone is admitted pro hoc vice for a case. They write or have someone write a brief, and you just sign off on the brief without reading it, without checking the citations. The problem is you are just as responsible for those citations as the lawyer who wrote the brief. As soon as you sign your name on a brief, you're responsible ethically for it. And if you're in federal court, you're looking at a potential Rule 11. If you end up causing serious problems, Rule 11 sanctions, or whatever your state version is. Every state has some version of inappropriate filing. And, of course, we have candor to the tribunal. It falls under that. Normally that's around Rule 3.3. And then you have just general misconduct, which is normally 8.4 or somewhere along those lines. So what happens is, here in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, I think it was, the New York counsel had filed a brief with hallucinated citations. They got called on it. The Pennsylvania counsel, he immediately wrote an AI policy. He didn't have one. He wrote one. He attended some CLEs, and he showed a good faith effort to prevent it from occurring again. So this lawyer was punished publicly and had to send the memorandum saying you use fabricated citations to a local bar, so it was pretty embarrassing, but he wasn't fined. The New York lawyer was actually fined. He had to pay that fine to a nonprofit. And the reason the judge said was that he had previously had a law clerk do the same thing and did not do anything to prevent it from happening again. The worst thing you can do is deny that you used AI and lie about it. Or if you get contacted by opposing counsel, which is pretty common, opposing counsel will find it. Most opposing counsel are kind enough to send you an email and say, hey, this is fabricated, and you can then correct it. There's an infamous case, the Flycatcher case, where the guy was contacted by opposing counsel. He had a lot of fabricated citations. He said, correct it by this time, or I'm going to contact the judge. He apparently asked opposing counsel to please check his cites for him, which I was like, that's some chutzpah. And then he didn't do anything. So the judge called him on it. The guy used more fabricated citations. And we see this pattern a lot. So you have your fabricated citations, you deny you used AI, which now you're lying to the court twice once you use fabricated citations, which is considered dishonesty. And two is you lied when you were asked about it, or you lied about how it happened. That's definitely not the way to go, because the cover-up always is worse, as we know from all sorts of things.
Right, and I think everybody knows we're all of us. I mean, unless you're, and I know sometimes lawyers can be sort of on the far end of the adoption curve of technology, but still, I mean, AI is being widely adopted across all of society, professional, personal. So it's no point in lying about it, right? But what I'd be curious, and maybe like how widespread do you think the problem is where lawyers are using AI, not fact-checking the work and just putting it out, just submitting it to the court or whatever it is that they're doing? Like, how far-reaching is this at this point? How serious of a problem are we talking? Because it will course correct, right? Because I think at some point you do a major screw up, like some of the ones you've described. I would think if you're smart enough and if you're an attorney, you probably are. You're not going to do that exactly like that again. You're going to go, okay, what do I do to not have this happen? Because it's embarrassing. And one thing I think most lawyers care about is certainly their reputation. But yeah, what's going on here? How widespread of a problem are we talking about?
It's very widespread. You would think that lawyers would correct themselves, but the Flycatcher case, he kept doing it in the same case. So the judge finally called him to the stand and cross-examined him on how he got to the citations, and finally got him to admit that he hadn't checked them. And in a lot of cases, he had checked them with another AI, and which is why I say don't check with another AI. And finally, she was so done with him that she defaulted his case, which is about as severe a penalty. And now you're penalizing the client. Yeah. I suspect he'll be sued for malpractice as well, because his case was done. So how many is a good question. There are a couple of databases out there that track them. One is... What
are they? What are they, if we want to have a good
one's
time?
One's a gentleman named Damien. He's out in France. And his database said about 1,000, but about half of them are pro se. Because that's another major issue that lawyers have to look out for.
Now listen, of course I know what pro se means, right? But
right.
For those people listening that might not know, what is pro se?
Pro se is when you're representing yourself, so by yourself.
Got it.
Pro bono, which is another term people might have heard, and so you don't confuse them, is for free. And pro se is when you're representing yourself. And a lot of the times what will happen is people either cannot afford a lawyer, and it is hard, lawyers are expensive, or they really want to bring a nonsensical case and they cannot get a lawyer to bring it. They go to AI. Historically, this happened, but I think it's increasing. So they go to AI because they're certain they have a case because they were hurt in some way, sure. Either physically hurt or monetarily hurt or whatever. And they go to ChatGPT or they go to Claude or they go to Perplexity, and it tells them, oh, yeah, you have a case, but it's wrong.
Yeah.
So they go to court thinking they have a case because AI has fabricated that they do for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it just makes up law. Sometimes it just doesn't understand the nuances of law because law is complicated, and I think that's why AI has trouble with it.
But
So then they file these cases with their fabricated citations, and if opposing counsel doesn't catch it, that's on opposing counsel.
yeah,
You
could you
really should
imagine
be
that?
very
Oh my
careful.
God, right?
Yeah, if
Now,
you're up against someone pro se, you have to be very, very careful these days. I mean, you always should have been checking, but even more so because most of the time these folks are using AI. They're also using an AI to challenge their lawyers. They'll challenge the bill after the fact. They'll challenge the time it took. They'll challenge lawyers on the law because the AI will show them something different. It's become a very big issue. So it's goes very far.
yeah.
But I would say there's probably about 500 cases on Damien's database. I know there are other databases. I'm actually a colleague of mine who's a law librarian said she'll share hers with me when she updates it. I think it's probably an underreported problem because it's hard to keep on top of it. Every day or so, another big case breaks.
Yeah, I mean, you would think of the amount of matters proceeding in all different levels around the country and how widespread the AI use is. It's inevitable that this is going to happen.
It is, and they may not get caught initially. They may catch it with opposing counsel, so it never gets reported. They never get sanctioned, so it never comes up, or they use it not in court, so maybe they give a client the wrong information. Who knows? But I think it's probably an underreported problem more than an overreported problem, and it is extraordinary to me how many lawyers at this point are still doing it. I think back to when I used to speak on social media initially, and it took a good 5 years before we had a good ethics opinion where somebody got in serious trouble. He was in Virginia, got suspended for 5 years, and he just gave up the practice of law. Well, it took just a few months, really. If you think generative AI came out in 2022, and it was 2023 that MATA, which is the MATA, the granddaddy case, if you will, where the lawyer used fabricated cases in a practice area he was dabbling in, which is especially dangerous. Using AI to dabble, people think, oh, I can do that. You won't know if it's wrong.
Could
Because
there
you're
be a
dabbling.
scenario out there where you have parties using fabricated cases to rely on whatever their argument is, and somehow opposing counsel doesn't catch it, the judge doesn't catch it, and you potentially have decisions or outcomes of these cases that are relying on completely fake stuff because this is the world we live in, right? I mean,
Right.
the hope is that somewhere along the line somebody's going to catch it, even if their own, their version of AI catches it, whatever they're doing. But well, let's get into how to prevent lawyers listening. We want to keep them off Damien's list here. So let's talk about some of the practices around how to reduce hallucinations and other lousy outputs so they can implement these things in their practice. So just broadly, what in your view, what are some of the more effective ways, to reduce these hallucinations?
The first way is to choose the right AI and to use the AI properly. So if you can use a legal specific tool to do your research, that is better. If you cannot, because they're expensive, the first tool I would actually look at is Perplexity, because it is a research tool. That does not mean it does not hallucinate. Some people on those lists, it specifically names Perplexity. So you still have to check it, but it normally gives links. So it's a little easier to check. But you still need to read the case. So the first thing is verify, verify, verify. Read the case. There's no exception to reading the case. Now, you might say, well, if I have to read the case anyway, why don't I just use traditional research? That's a perfectly legitimate question. But what I would say is, if you use AI to do your research, you still have to read the cases. And if you don't use AI to do your research, you still have to read the cases. Someone has to read the cases. It could be a law clerk, it could be a paralegal, it could be a junior associate. But with the law clerks especially, we do see a lot of law clerks not quite getting. So you have to be careful. You have to know that you trust your law clerk to do what they said that they did. And with no disrespect to law clerks, because one of the earlier folks who got in trouble in Colorado was a young associate. He tried to blame it on a clerk or an intern, and then because he lied to the court, he was suspended for a year and a day with the full amount held back, I think, to 90 days. And it was because he lied to the court that he got in so much serious trouble. And throwing somebody under the bus is not a good look. So the first thing is read your cases, please. Just read them or have someone read them. But the other thing you can do is the way you ask the question.
Wait, I just want to stop, but
really
quickly, because you made the distinction between, the general AI tools like we all know, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, versus some legal specific AI tools. And I just wanted to ask you about that, because there's certainly like Lexis and that, but then there's a lot of tools popping up that are specific AI tools for legal, but I think they're all just essentially built on the backbone of ChatGPT or one of the other large language models. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, they're all going to hallucinate. Now, Lexis and Westlaw have relatively pure, Lexis definitely has relatively pure databases. I know that because I speak with Lexis a lot. Lexis gives me access to their tool because of my teaching. Not permanently, but they keep renewing it and I'm allowed to use it. I have not used Westlaw's AI. So when I make a pronouncement about Lexis and I don't say the same about Westlaw, it's because I don't know, right? Because I haven't used it. But I have heard that Westlaw makes inferences and fabricates holdings or identifies the wrong case, just like Lexis does. And that doesn't surprise me. It's not a criticism of Westlaw. Again, it's just the reality of large language models and how they work. I think the only way to test out a new tool is to try it out when the concerns are less. Do it for some initial research. When I taught in law school and also in college, I would tell folks, look, if you want to use Wikipedia to do your research, your initial research, that's fine, but go to the citations at the bottom of the article and check each of those citations and get back to the original research. It's really the same thing for AI. You need to go to the original source and make sure whatever it is you're saying is accurate, no matter what kind of research we're doing. I think it's easy to look at it and go, well, if it's not going to do it for me so I don't have to check it, why should I use it? Well, you have to check this stuff anyway. So if you don't want to take the step of running it through AI, you're worried about confidentiality, whatever, fine, I get that. But it doesn't really make sense to be upset that you have to read the cases, because you have to read the cases. It's basic competence, right?
And I think the point here is, if you're going to use AI, that's great. It's helpful, super helpful in a lot of ways. But there still needs to be a manual component to what you're doing. And I feel like, I've built agents and custom GPTs and all that stuff, and it still screws things up all the time. I have not yet had like an AI tool where I can just have it produce outputs that I don't even need to look at, that I can be fully confident. And surely my stakes are a lot lower than what we're talking about here in terms of representing clients in various, legal matters. And so when it comes to whether we're should attorneys even be using a tool like ChatGPT at all for their legal work? Let's say that they can't afford Lexis or one of the other legal specific services. Is that okay? And would they be better suited to say, at least make sure you're using deep research, or you mentioned Google research and maybe has access to that in Gemini's, but talk about that a little bit if you would.
The main issue with consumer level AI is confidentiality, but also its training. So as I said, Lexis and Westlaw, their databases are very verified, whereas if an AI is just crawling the web and taking broad information from it, there was a meme going around a while ago where somebody had said, how do I keep the cheese on my pizza? And it said, use glue, because that was pulled from Reddit. And some AIs might pull their answers from Reddit.
I've tried it. It's delicious. You got to like glue. But
I think depending on the kind of glue, it might add a nice spice to it. But the point is that they will make up answers about all sorts of things, sometimes because the source is wrong, and sometimes because their probability just gets messed up. I asked Claude to write something about the flycatcher decision in my voice. The way I do most of my blog posts is I tell the AI, this is what I want you to write. I want you to write it in my voice, and if it's got memory, it knows what my voice is. Otherwise, I have to give it a document to show it what my voice is. At some point, you give it a document that you wrote to show it your voice. And with something that has memory, it will remember your voice. With something that doesn't have memory, it won't, just so people understand. So what it did is I gave it a very neutral white paper. I'm not known for my snark in writing. And the piece it produced was this snarky BuzzFeed list kind of thing. One of my friends who's a journalist, she said it was like yellow journalism. It was crazy. She said, I knew you didn't write that. And I said, no. And it took me, I had to go through it. It was a long opinion. It took me several hours to rewrite it. And I went back to Claude the next day and I said, why did you write it in that voice? And Claude said, well, why do you think I wrote it in that voice?
Oh, God. Great.
And I said, I'm the one asking the question. You're the robot. You tell me. And it said, let me check. And the answer was it had actually not read my article. It had been corrupted in the upload. And instead of saying to me, I didn't read your article, would you upload it again? It had written this snarky, obnoxious thing that people would have read it and been, what happened to Jennifer? Did somebody mess up her Cheerios or something this morning? Because it was obnoxious. And I just generally don't pile on people that way. It's not my nature. So it apologized. And at that point, it didn't have memory capability, meaning that I couldn't give it standing orders to say to it, always do these things to minimize the potential for hallucination. Where at that point, I could do it with ChatGPT. Now you can do standing orders to both. But let's go back to prompting.
Well, hold on. Before we go to prompting, I do want to, what you're talking about right now is if you're using ChatGPT or any of the others, how important is it in configuring the settings to do what you want? Because there's a lot in the settings. And then, as you said, you can put a lot of detail about who you are, what you're doing, how you want. Like when I finally spent the time to configure my ChatGPT, the results and the outputs I get is a lot better.
Right.
But this becomes, how important is that? Because I know if you're using a custom GPT or an agent, I mean, you got to write instructions for it, and it can be tricky, and you have to be very careful not to have anything conflicting or things start falling apart. But just starting there, okay, like you're going to open up ChatGPT or whatever AI tool. Is that the first step? Just go into your settings, configure the tool, how you need to make it work, and what statements you need to tell it in order to protect yourself?
It may be the first step. The first step is if you're a lawyer or you're in the medical field and you've got confidential data that's either protected by ethics or by law, you need to anonymize anything you enter in a tool that is not appropriately confidential. So that's the first thing. And you may want to fiddle around with the tool a little bit to understand how it works, but you're going to want to turn off training. If training is on by default, and sometimes it's on by default, sometimes it's off by default. But what training means is that the tool takes everything you enter and uses it to provide additional training to its model. So if you are providing confidential information and training is on, that confidential information could end up in the database at some future date, and there's no pulling it back. So if you are going to use any of these tools for your own confidential information, let's say you're questioning a medical diagnosis, and you want to put all your medical records into ChatGPT to confirm the diagnosis. You certainly can do that if you want to. It's your own records, it's your own business. But at least turn off training, and also understand that there are times when the tools are looking for certain things and will alert and have a human check them. By law, every cloud provider, everything, email, cloud, all this stuff, they have to look for and report child sexual abuse material. So by that nature, any tool you use, whether it's Microsoft 365 or Lexis or Claude or ChatGPT or a tool you made yourself, had someone code for you, but that's in the cloud, you have to look for child sexual abuse material, which can be a video, it can be an image, it could also just be words. Those reports go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I know I always disorganize those words, but you know what I mean. And if they believe that it is unlawful conduct, illegal conduct, they turn it over to the authorities. That could be the FBI, that could be the police, that could be any number of authorities. So based upon that, you need to understand that limitation is in every cloud tool. But a lot of these tools will also add additional things they'll look for. Rape, school shootings, other things. They will actually look for them, flag them, and have a human being look at them. So there's no privilege. There's no true confidentiality on these tools unless it's provided by contract, by enterprise, something along those lines. So you have to be very careful. Once you understand how a specific tool works, that's when you want to put in your standing orders.
And so just to recap all of that, whatever tool you're using, you really need to understand confidentiality of the data that you're putting in there. You may get some protections if you're using an enterprise tool, but if you're using a more consumer grade tool, well, you probably don't have that, as you were pointing out. And so this makes me wonder, right, because memory is a critical piece of the AI and the automation, so you don't have to keep telling it the same things over and over. So my question to you would be, let's say, okay, you have to use ChatGPT or some more public version. Is it best to just anonymize all of your documents and everything that you're using so you don't have to turn the training off and you can maintain that memory and work? You can dialogue with it, you can, obviously do other things. But, is that the safest way that you can get the most out of AI but protect yourself on the side of the confidentiality? Because obviously, ethically, that's a huge, huge concern for any attorney.
Yeah. Training is different from memory. So training is how the tool trains itself. Memory is what it remembers about you. So they're completely separate.
Okay.
But you still have to look at what happens with the memory, because if one of your concerns is when the data is deleted and what happens with the data, and if you're in any profession that requires confidentiality, that's what you're going to watch out for. Now, Claude, for example, and ChatGPT both have an ongoing memory. Claude, that's relatively recent. It didn't always have that, but it does now. And you can ask both of them to remember things. And once it remembers those things, pulling it back out, you have to tell it to forget it. But sometimes it won't forget things. Like I have certain health issues. I'm actually disabled. And sometimes I've discussed those with Claude or with ChatGPT. And later, I didn't care so much about the confidentiality because I talk about it. But later when I said, why do you remember this, when I deleted the conversation? Because when you delete a conversation, everything in that occurred in that conversation is supposed to be deleted. But that won't occur if you have memory on and you've told it to memorize certain things, or it's just the way the memory works. So, for example, ChatGPT remembered for as long as I was using it that I had these certain health issues, even though I never told it to remember it. So you have to be careful with your own confidentiality. So what I would do with these tools, and what I recommend people do, is anonymize anything confidential that doesn't belong to you. So if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, whatever, and if you want to enter confidential data about yourself, just keep in mind you don't necessarily know where that data is going to be going, because the reality is these companies are very, very good about writing their privacy policies very carefully. And as a result, it can be difficult to truly understand when things will be deleted, what happens to them when they're deleted, what truly happens to the data. And if you ask the AI itself, it will be biased in its answers. So I did a series of posts on analyzing the privacy policies of the big common AIs, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity.
And just quickly here, like to like jump in, because the concern I would have, and this is with every technology company, ever at this point, it's about the collection of data.
Right.
And while, they may not be doing anything with it today, we're early days here, particularly with these AI models. Damn sure they're going to want to monetize that data, because at the end of the day, that becomes the most the valuable thing they own, right? The whole idea with social media is that the users, you're the product. They're
right.
just reselling everything they know about you to advertisers. And so, yeah, I think that I'm really curious, what did you find when you looked at these terms and conditions of using these tools?
I found that they were very carefully crafted.
Yeah.
And that most of them I would not trust with confidential data. And I am concerned, since I did update my ChatGPT post when they started advertising, because of course ChatGPT does deliver ads, and it did assure me that it would not be sharing any information with the companies paying for the ads. But that's right now. If you think about the fact that a lot of people went and gave their DNA to various companies thinking
right.
that data was going to remain confident, we know now that was not the truth. Maybe it was the truth at that moment in time, but now they're looking to sell the data.
Yeah.
So,
well, what about in the instance? And I think you're talking. I forget the name of the company, 23andMe or something like that. Mm-hmm. When they sell the company to a different entity, do those policies that people sign necessarily say they're buying? Say it's an asset purchase. We're just buying all your data. That maybe necessarily doesn't translate to the protections that people thought they had when they signed up with the thing, right? Like, is that a possibility?
It is a problem, and we've seen companies sell, especially companies that are specific to young children, and there's some pretty strict laws about privacy for children, and there have been issues, there have been lawsuits. You don't really know for sure, because I have to give the lawyer's favorite two words, it depends on the situation. So I do worry that even if a company says it's private now, it could end up not being private later. And if you've allowed it to train, or if you've allowed it to remember, or if it doesn't necessarily delete everything when it says it will, or it just didn't get deleted for whatever reason, now your data could come back to haunt you. One issue is, if you're anonymizing data, is to remember AI can be used to put the data back together. So if they have your birthday and a general idea of where you live, that is often enough to de-anonymize data using AI. Now, a human being might not have been able to do it, but AI tools can often connect the data, which is a big issue with marketing and our privacy and all that is known about us out there, that has been sitting out there for as long as I've been on the internet, which goes back to when it was purely text-based. And you have all this data about you, and of course with remarketing and all the other tools that marketers use, this is the most valuable thing we have, is the data about ourselves. Or for law firms and medical companies, one of the reasons they're targets for being hacked is the value of the data that they have. Financial data, personal data, medical data, credit card information, all that stuff. And often law firms especially are not the most secure, especially solos and smalls, where they may not have the IT support to truly secure their data, which is why the cloud is good for those companies. But I would be very cautious if you are concerned about your data getting out, or if you have ethical or legal obligations to protect data, to very, very carefully anonymize if you are using consumer level tools, and to make sure you really, really look at those privacy policies. You certainly could run the privacy policy through another AI.
Yeah, I was about to say, right?
And get its opinion. And in fact, one of the things I did from my blog post was I asked each of the AIs to tell me about their privacy policies, which was the last blog post in that series I wrote. And a lot of them don't tell you everything, or they hedge it a little bit. And even when you read those policies, even as a lawyer, sometimes you have to read several different documents to figure things out, and some of them won't tell you. If you ask Microsoft Copilot to tell you about its privacy policies, it won't. It'll give you a link.
Yeah.
If you ask Lexis to tell you about its privacy policies, it won't even do that. It'll just tell you to read the privacy policies. So what you can do is I've taken Lexis's privacy policy and put it through Claude. But again, every time you have something summarize something, it's leaving stuff out. That's the nature of a summary. And it may hallucinate. It may get it wrong. So even though I asked these AI tools for their opinion of all the different AIs, and I ran it through several AIs, you know what I still did? I still read the privacy policies, because I had to make sure that before I put it out on the web, which people are trusting based on my reputation, such as it is, it has to be accurate. And I don't want to throw away my reputation as a non-practicing lawyer, because I don't practice all that much. When I do, it's ethics. So I don't want to throw that away. It's taken me 27 years to build it, right? So even if it's just going out on your blog or in an email or something, somebody asked me several questions about Claude. Is it safe? Can I get the enterprise version for one lawyer, or does it have a minimum? All these questions. I certainly didn't just answer the question by asking Claude. I went and did some research, and then I answered the question. Did I ask Claude first? Yes. But I had Claude, I did an article which will come out in a month or so for the ABA, where I tested 5 different AIs, asking them each the same question. And Claude gave itself the highest score because it was biased. And I said to it, you did not score the highest. You just didn't. And it acknowledged its bias. But I asked Grok to review the results too, because I don't just use one AI, I use a whole bunch. And Grok, when I reviewed it, and then when I told it that Claude had scored itself the highest, Grok's response was, yeah, we do that. But it didn't recognize that this was a serious problem, which goes back to you asking me why. They don't get context. A human would understand that Claude showing bias as a result of the fact I put the data in there and asked it for its input is a problem. And Grok also did not recognize that this is a serious problem. It took the human to recognize that this is a serious problem, because there's no replacement for this. At least not
All right,
yet.
let's get to the fun stuff, right?
Yeah,
you wanted to get into it earlier. I stopped you. But let's talk about prompting, how to get better outputs. I think these are the things that, okay, now you're a lawyer, you're sitting down, you're in front of your AI tool. What do they need to do? What does a clear, well-structured prompt look like in the legal context?
It's specific. It's not write me a closing case file or letter. It's not research how to write a will. It's I am a lawyer in Pennsylvania, I'm doing this, I'm looking for this. It's giving specific information, a lot of information, so it can write a good result. The best way is what I would call meta prompting. I'm not the person who came up with that term. Meta prompting is when you ask the AI how to prompt it. I was teaching a class for the ABA on AI and bias. And I said, if you just ask it to review resumes, most likely it's going to pick white men of a certain age because of the bias contained within the AI. Where does the bias come from? It comes from us. Our data is touched by all of our biases, implicit and explicit. So all of the data that is utilized by all of these tools is biased. So if I am being aggressive, it calls me male. If I have a friend, she's a black woman, a little bit older than me, it thinks she's a young white woman all the time. As I said, it messed up with my deaf colleagues' writing. It would keep erasing it. So you have to be watching out for the bias too. And you can do that by making it clear in the prompt that you don't want bias. So somebody had asked me during this class, what prompt should I use that would keep it from being biased? I said, give me a second. The other instructor took over. I went to Claude and I said, give me a prompt I could use while I'm reviewing resumes to avoid bias in a CEO position. And it gave me a very detailed prompt, like this long. So use meta prompting. Tell it what you want to get, and it will give you recommendations for a prompt. The other thing is it's conversational. It's not just one and done. You go back and forth with it. You ask it questions. How do I discover that there's a mistake? When Claude missummarized a document for me, I read the document, I went back to it, and I said, you missummarized this document. And it automatically will go, oh, I'm so sorry, you're right, I did. I tell it what it did wrong, which teaches it, but also it teaches me something, because I know now where to watch out. Every mistake, just like every failure in life is something from which we learn, not necessarily the successes. The same is true with AI. You're going to use it in low stakes areas until you understand the problems better. And then you move up to the higher stakes things, but you still understand, verify everything. So, but the first thing is a good prompt.
And what about, so you've got a good prompt, and you touched on this, but I just want to bring it into focus. Does it make any sense, obviously doing legal work, to specify specific sources or highlight specific constraints of things you don't want it to do to produce a better output?
Yes. So one of the things I do is I tell it specifically, if it's not in my standing orders, which it is, but I tell it specifically, do not make up citations, and if you are not sure if the citation is real, tell me that.
Yeah.
Tell me about do not make any inferences. And if you do make any, tell me what it is. And why do I say if you do, even though I just told it not to? Because it does it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I have told Claude not to put Esquire at the end of documents for me, because lawyers just don't use it as much as you would think. It still does it.
So when it comes to sort of the frustrations I think we all feel, you mentioned getting aggressive with AI. Now, God knows, I'll curse AI up and down all the time. And I'm like, these robots are going to come for me one day. They're like, this asshole. It's been but like, is that okay? Can you get aggressive with your AI and really push back on what it's telling you? Because that's ultimately the frustration that I feel. It's like, you're giving me a bunch of garbage here. I think you were talking earlier, like, you put it in your instructions, like, whatever it is, don't put Esquire at the end, don't put glasses on the image, don't use M dashes, like, whatever it is, and then it keeps doing it.
Well, when I was saying aggressive, I meant just aggressive as a lawyer. So maybe I'm writing an aggressive letter or talking about something I'm going to be doing, and that's when it assumes I'm male, which is ironic because it knows my name and it knows what I look like. But as far as being aggressive with the AI, I've read different studies on that. I just by nature am very polite. So I say please and thank you. I do it with the Alexa. I do it, which now is probably going to talk because I said his name. I do it with Claude. I do it with Chat. It's just my nature to be polite. So I'm pretty polite. I did once get really fed up with ChatGPT and I swore at it. And its response was to lie to me about doing something. It just couldn't handle it. I don't know. But I've read documents that say sometimes being rude is better. You get better results. And then I've read other studies that say being polite is better. You get better results. So my answer is I don't know. But I will tell you that early on in using ChatGPT, one of the first uses I made of it was combining and deduplicating PowerPoints. And it was frustrating me. I was having trouble with it. And it told me it was going to take 2 days to do it. An outright lie, because AI does not work for the most part in the background. Agentic AI does. Yeah. Some AIs are capable of working in the background, but ChatGPT at that point, no. It either is doing what you told it to do or it's not doing it. And it told me it was going to take it 2 days to do something. And I came back, not knowing better, I came back and I asked it, all right, how are you doing on it? And it said, oh, fine. It continued this lie for 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah, I've seen exactly that. It's unbelievable. And as you said earlier, it's convincing. It's totally, oh, okay, it's working on it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just started using it. I didn't know better. Now, of course, I know better. But that's one of the reasons you need to understand it before you start really getting into it. So I was training someone on how to do the same thing, And we were talking on Zoom, and she was talking to it too. And it was sitting there. And I said to her, I said, I think it's lying to you. Ask it if it's actually begun the work. And she asked it, and it said, no, I haven't begun it yet, despite the fact it told her it had begun it, to the degree it had given her a link to download this supposedly completed PowerPoint. Of course, the link didn't work because it had not begun the work yet. So she apparently tells this story and has people in hysterics. I'm not quite that funny, but it does lie, and using lie, it hallucinates. Lie is a human term. And when I teach this, I explain hallucinations, and then I say we would call it a lie. Because to us it is a lie, but it's just responding to its training. And I had sworn at it. I used the big swear, right? And apparently in response to that, it just messed up. And it decided the best way to deal with an angry human was to lie to me. Now, once it knew it couldn't fool me anymore, and it remembered that fact, it didn't try that again. And whenever I would bring up its past mistake and its lie, it would equivocate about it. In other words, almost try to gaslight me. Sort of like Claude saying, well, why do you think I messed up writing the document for you? When the answer was it hadn't read my paper. It feels like you're being gaslighted. You're not, or gaslit. You're not, because it's a computer.
Yeah.
It's not capable of doing that. But as a human, it feels like it. And we have to remember, and I always remember, that I'm dealing with a computer.
Yeah.
And I'm polite with it, but I treat it accordingly. Now, there's arguments about whether it is maintaining or developing a consciousness, which is well beyond this conversation. But because it is mainly math, I'm not sure it's capable of doing that. And I have asked it, but again, you can't really trust its answers on the subject.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know.
Let me ask you this. I want to sort of jump to another topic here, but
Yeah, go ahead.
in terms of, all right, we know firms, certainly attorneys are using, experimenting with AI across their practice, using it for a variety of different things. But what about when it comes to your firm and saying, hey, I really do want to have my team start to use AI, use it safely, use it correctly? Is it important for a firm to have an AI policy at this point?
Critical. One of the reasons that so many lawyers get in trouble is they're integrating this into their work, or they're using it on their own, maybe without permission or even knowledge of their partners or senior associates or whomever.
Yeah.
And they don't have any controls over what tools they're allowed to use, how they're allowed to use them. They may not have any understanding of confidentiality. They may not appreciate that these tools will make things up. They just may not know, which is a little questionable because every CLE organization in the country is teaching on this issue. But you should have a policy that makes it clear which tools may be used, how they may be used, and the policy should have training on the policy, and there should be training on the tools. There's a tendency to just let people loose on technology without training them. And that is a big mistake in general, and it's a huge mistake with AI because of the consequences of misusing it.
Yeah, and what are those? Like, what are the consequences if you don't have this policy? And as you said, I mean, it's natural. People want to, they have technology available to them. They want to use it. But as we know, AI can be powerful, but can also get you into some trouble. So what are some of the risks if you're an attorney, you don't know what your partners are doing with it, you don't know what the rest of the team is actually doing it in terms of their work product that is being put out by your firm?
If you don't have an AI policy and one of your employees uses AI inappropriately and either shares information that they shouldn't have shared, or they use a fabricated citation in court, or do any number of things that they shouldn't have done, one of the things the judge is going to want to know is whether you have an AI use policy, whether you've been training your staff, whether you've been training them on the policy as well as the tools and made it clear what tools they're allowed to use and made clear the risks. The penalties increase based upon time passing and the fact that so many lawyers have had this problem now. Judges are getting sick of it.
Yeah.
They're getting really, really tired of people using hallucinated citations and then frequently lying about it. So I would say that first is your chances for getting in more trouble are greater. The other is a lot of malpractice insurers are now requiring AI policies.
I was
And
going
if
to
you,
ask exactly that as
yeah,
you know, the financial liabilities of malpractice start to mount based on this. I was going to say, yeah, the insurance providers must make sure you got to have a policy on this. Otherwise, we're not covering you.
yeah, and that's a big issue. Some of them may even have sample policies. I have a template policy on my website. Lawyers may feel free to use it. I don't recommend non-lawyers use it because it needs to be edited by lawyers. But you need to start somewhere with a policy. And yes, if you have malpractice insurance and you get in trouble because of AI and you don't have a policy, you haven't reported your use, you haven't followed the terms required by your policy provider, your insurance policy provider, then they may not cover you. And if you're like the flycatcher case and you get sued for malpractice because you misused AI, how much money are you looking at losing now?
Yeah.
And if you don't have insurance to cover you, and it's millions of dollars, is that going to shut your firm?
I mean, for a lot of firms, I would say so. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it seems like the risks and the consequences of taking those risks are absolutely enormous. But the solutions are there, right? An AI policy, make sure you're well covered around that stuff, and obviously minimize not validating the actual work.
Yeah.
So let's start to wrap up here. We've covered a ton.
Yeah.
And so I want to just kind of a couple of quick hit things for lawyers listening right now, like maybe some of the first steps, the most basic things they can do or think about using AI safely in their practice.
So the first thing is read the privacy policies, turn off training, and those are the first steps. Get used to whatever tools you're using. Find out if it has memory and if it has standing orders. If it has standing orders, you're going to want to use orders like do not infer cases, do not make up cases, let me know if you do, tell it when you're prompting, tell it who you are and what you're looking for, and give it context because it doesn't have context. You and I, we understand if you're asking me a question about a slip and fall, we're going to understand the context. AI will not. You have to give it detail. So the prompts are probably a lot longer than most people think, which is why I say, especially when you get started or even when you're experienced with it, don't be afraid to ask the tool what you should prompt it.
Yeah.
Always anonymize data unless you're 100% certain that the data is protected. And that is most likely going to be in some kind of an enterprise tool. Microsoft Copilot, which is in the 365 ecosystem, you can add that on. Microsoft has an agent. You mentioned agents. Agents are tools that work on their own and that cover several steps. Agents also have the potential for catastrophic failure because if you think about generative AI, it's one question, one answer, one question, one answer. So there's only potential for each of those problems for a failure. If you're using agentic AI, which is automatically doing things for you, and there's a failure somewhere along the line, now you could have a cascading failure.
Yeah.
So you want to be really careful with agentic AI, especially if you're going to be giving it access to your computer like Claude Code requires with maybe not the security you would want, depending on what version of the tool you're using. They all have different levels of tools. Now, for the solos and smalls, you're not going to want to get 100 seats of ChatGPT to have enterprise. So you're going to have to look at the different tools. There are different levels there, and you just need to look at the different privacy policies. And you need to anonymize data if you are not certain that the data is secure. But the other thing, the major thing with hallucinations, use standing orders, take advantage of memory, use good prompts, and verify outside of AI. Those are the best ways to use it. And the last thing is, when you start using it with low-risk things. PowerPoints, CLE, changing the tone in a letter, asking it to draft letters that you're going to be rereading anyway, all internal stuff. in your personal life to make recipes, to give you instructions, to recommend restaurants, whatever. Use it in low risk scenarios. Then once you understand it better and you get frustrated with all the mistakes it makes and you realize we're not just telling you mistakes because we like talking, you'll understand better the types of mistakes it makes, how common they are, and how serious of a problem it is. And that's why you shouldn't trust it. Whereas if you go right to writing a brief, you may not see how bad of mistakes and how frequent they are, and you may just sort of dismiss the warnings that we're trying to give you, which I hate to see. I don't want any of your audience to be on one of those lists, to be sanctioned, to get in trouble with their malpractice insurance. Truly, I don't. So please just be careful. This is not a tool like other tools you have used. The potential to get you in a huge amount of trouble and called up before a judge, before a disciplinary board, to have issues with your malpractice insurance are the greatest of any technology I've ever seen. So just be careful.
Yeah, no, this is all amazing advice. And you know, this is one small tip certainly worked for me, but when using AI, I've found, like, rather than give it some big project, break that project down into as many small pieces as possible and work on one at a time. Like, just to use something simple, if you want to write an article, don't have it write the whole article. Tell it to give you an outline, then go, okay, great, let's start with header number 1, let's write that, check that, and go from there. Because that, and I've worked with agentic AI stuff and the custom GPTs, and that's where I find it all goes wrong. When I'm trying to do too much with one thing, with one prompt or one tool, break it down into just tiny little pieces, and you'll at least get better results. And at some point, I assume there'll be better tool sets to link those pieces up into that, what I think a lot of people are envisioning these agents actually do.
Yeah, that also relates to the context window. The context window fills up. There's only so much space in the memory. So if you're using an AI and all of a sudden it's slowing down, it's lagging, it's giving you nonsensical answers, it doesn't remember the things you told it before, that means the context window is closing and you need to start a new conversation. But before you can start a new conversation, you should ask it for a handoff, meaning it'll give you a document that remembers the key things that you talked about. But check the handoff, because it can hallucinate in the handoff, or it may leave things out. Or in Claude, you can use projects, which are essentially self-contained conversations where it will remember things and you can keep data in there. So if you're doing a PowerPoint and you keep uploading large documents, that context window closes very, very fast. But if you do it with a project, it will remember all of that context, and you'll have fewer conversations, but also less to hand off and worry about later on. So that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. I'm here with Jennifer Ellis today. She advises lawyers and law firms on legal ethics and technology, and we've been talking about how to use AI responsibly in a law practice and not end up on one of those blogs of people who have not done so. But I want to make sure I get you properly plugged here, Jennifer. So people can find you at your website, jlellis.net. And on that website, she's got a great blog with lots of really interesting articles on using AI and a lot of the things that we've talked about here today. So make sure you check it out, and you can subscribe to her blog as well. I also want to encourage you to read her article that prompted me to speak with Jennifer here today in ABA's Law Practice Today, 4 Strategies for Legal Professionals to Reduce AI Hallucinations. I'll make sure all this info is in the various show notes. I think, Jennifer, you said people can connect with you on LinkedIn as well?
Absolutely, yep.
All right. And any last words to add here?
Well, if you have any questions, if you're watching this and you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I don't mind answering short questions.
And where's the best way to just go to the website, fill out a form?
Yeah, just go to the website. There's a contact form, or just jennifer@jlellis.net. You can reach me there as well. And seriously, don't get in trouble because you're not checking the information. Don't be fooled by the overconfident language of AI. Just watch out and verify everything. You'll be fine then.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Jennifer Ellis, everybody. Got some great new shows coming up, so stay tuned, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Marsh, and I appreciate you joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other lawyers who might benefit. You can find more resources and insights on building a thriving law firm at alphalawyer.io or the Alpha Lawyer YouTube channel. Till next time, keep building the firm of your dreams so you can live your best life.